All right, folks. All right. Welcome to the Ujamaa Hour. This is an Ujamaa Hour first. We are live from Floods Hall. This is the first in our broadcast having a live guest in sort of in studio, in Floods Hall studio, in something space, whatever where we are. In any case, this is the first because I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm experimenting, I'm evolving, I'm transforming, and testing out a few things. Basically, what I wanted to do was be able to use some more of the Floods Hall space in order to conduct some of these interviews, to also be able to bring people into space and share common space while we're actually doing these interviews. So this is what we're testing out tonight. We're testing out a new format, and hopefully you all are gonna, ride this test out with me. Um, I do see that my voice is broadcasting, and so hopefully I'm coming through clearly for you. I also am testing out some new network kit, so we'll see what happens tonight with this broadcast. But ultimately, we are here to continue what we have been doing for the course of 12 months, and some change, to explore Black social and solidarity economy, to have conversations with people that are actually working in that space, and to dig into some of these spaces as they exist, to examine some of these models, to share these models with other folks who are out there in the world, and see how we might advance some of these models, see how we might interlink these models, and just really, explore, experiment, exchange, and have, just intimate conversations about what the work looks like in different places and in different contexts. And so that's what we're doing here. And before I go too far, I should introduce myself. I am Mike Strode of the Coconut Collaborative. Tonight I have in studio, in Floods Hall studio, Joan Fadayiro.
That's right.
Fadayiro.
Fadayiro.
Boom! You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I worked it out. Yes, we got Joan Fadayiro with us of Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group and a bunch of other things. Like I mean, you can, we'll get to her backstory and we'll dig very deep into her backstory in a moment. So we'll get all the dirt.
Uh-oh.
But yes, so I'm, this is the Ujamaa Hour again, with the Coconut Collaborative. And what we are here to do at the moment, again, to explore Black social and solidarity economy. The Coconut Collaborative is a time bank meaning trading time as a currency. But we are also a solidarity economy incubator of sorts, right? We are interested in what's happening in the total landscape of the city, and we're interested in how time banking, how the exchange of time, how engaging with how doing deeper community engagement and peer-to-peer exchange could actually interact with the larger solidarity economy institutions in the city. Those solidarity economy institutions being cooperatives and community land trust, those solidarity economy institutions even being sort of those quasi socialist, government extensions, public libraries, public schools. What are the ways that time banking could be used to incentivize deeper participation in communities, and how can we as the Coconut Collaborative spur some of that thought, spur some of that conversation, and move those things forward? So that's what we're doing here. That's why we continue and persist with the Ujamaa Hour, and that's why we have also persisted with. If you did not see on the Coconut Collaborative page last month, we launched our time salon. So our time salon is the fourth Friday of every month. And at the time salon, we do these needs and offers markets. We engage with people who are interested in time banking. We do our time bank orientations. We have a monthly mixer. There's a bit of food. I do not cook, but I might in the future. Who knows? I mean, this is about peer exchange, skill exchange,
Okay.
and being of service to one another, right? We're building conviviality and relationship with each other in this space. And time banking is there at the center of that, because ultimately, as we build trust relationships in person, then ideally we can bring that back to the infrastructure of time banking and see how we are sharing our skills, how we are talking about what we need, and how we are doing all of that in a way that other people can access. Um, so that's a bit about the Coconut Collaborative and those time salons. Again, the fourth Friday of every month. So this month we'll be here on February 28th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. So make sure that if you are a member, come out, because you probably haven't had a deeper orientation in this way, right? And if you're not a member, you can come out and figure out what we're doing here in Chicago. Um, We'll also be in Oak Park February 29th, Leap Day. So we'll be doing a time salon and a needs and offers market at Compound Yellow out there. Make sure you check that out. I will make sure that these are posted in the comments section so that you actually have access to those events. And if you attend any of the needs and offers markets this month, you will be privy to this fancy new booklet. We have been working on um, really kind of having something that people can hold in their hands, that tangibly they can take away from the markets with them, to figure out what time banking is about, to know how to run these needs and offers markets themselves. We don't necessarily need you to come back to us to do this stuff. We need you to take the material, take the process, go back to your communities, do the markets there, figure out what people need, figure out what they're offering, and then that's a way that, again, we can make the time bank tangible in all of our communities throughout the city. And then at the end, you can have your kids draw on the map and figure out where you have been time banking throughout the city. So this map by Area Chicago, if you do not remember Area Chicago, they used to put out the fantastic half-fold papers, and this is from their People's Atlas project. So we got this map of Chicago, and they had some notes. Essentially, they used to put posters up, and people would decorate the maps with just kind of talking about how they see the city, right? How do we see the city? How can we design the city if we can't see the city and see how we see the city? So yes, you'll walk away with one of these booklets. And so make sure you're at the next Needs and Offers Market. We will also be at the Chicago Food Policy Summit, February 21st. So we'll be doing a session there. And later in March, we'll be at the Chicago Community Gardeners Association conference. So, make sure you come there to check us out as well. You got lots of places that you can touch upon the Coconut Collaborative, and we look forward to seeing you. And yes, now we want to make sure we dig into a little bit of what's happening with with our guest, because again, I'm shaky and I'm nervous, and it's my first time in studio with someone, and I'm intimidated by Joan, here
Stop
in this
it.
yellow dress.
Stop
So
it.
we're going to get into some things, and so I'm going to go ahead and switch a bit, because I need to get to my notes, and because I don't have my iPad, I'm gonna have to put my notes up on the screen. In any case, whatever. Yes. So let's start with this. So Joan Fadayiro,
Yes. Michael Tekken Strode.
who the
Yes.
heck do you think you are? That's a question that we used to ask in one of our poetry forums, and we always got interesting answers. Who do you think you are, Joan Fadayiro?
Okay. Well, I'm a black woman from the city of Chicago. Um, I'm a millennial, so some people think that says some things about a person. Um, I'm a community organizer. I've dedicated my life to the advancement of all people with the primary focus on black people.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way that's inclusive to all black people. So, women, queer, differently abled, all the different spaces that black people take up. Um, Black men too. I have to say that because y'all be getting sensitive well, But what else? um, Somehow I let a woman named Jeanette Taylor, who was recently elected alderperson of the 20th Ward and a close friend, someone that I've known from organizing when I first came in, tricked me into coming into her office to do community development. So that's one space of who I am. And then, like, a daughter, granddaughter, friend, just someone who tries to show up for people in both my personal relationships and personal spaces I occupy, but also my political spaces that I occupy as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's who I am.
Okay. And so help us with the story arc. So we recognize where you are now with the Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, which we'll talk about in a bit. We recognize where you are with the Alderman Jeanette Taylor's, or Alderperson Jeanette Taylor's office. So take us through the story arc. How did you get here?
Um,
I mean, in brief, I know it's a bit of a tale.
a great question with many different answers. I'll give the answer that's most familiar to me, rather. But so my background is not in organizing or political and all of those sorts, at least up until the point that I had graduated from college and come back to Chicago. Before that, I was doing biomedical science research, somewhat related because I was doing what they call research around disparities, particularly racial disparities in medicine. Um, and I got my whole degree and spent a whole lot of money. And at the end of it was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I didn't quite understand the fact that generally black people from working class families don't get to find their passion. You know, their passion doesn't feed them. So unknowingly, I decided that I wanted to figure out what really mattered to me. And I decided to come back to Chicago and try to make a difference. And in my mind at that time, remember, I didn't have a political context at that time. So I thought that meant evangelism. So when I first came back to Chicago, I actually was doing like street witnessing and things like that. And I was still in between. So I was studying for the MCAT. And through that, I had an opportunity to volunteer with some young people who were youth organizers at the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, COCO, and doing some academic enrichment work with them, helping them prepare for the ACT. And like I said, I knew I wanted to make a difference, but I had no idea what that meant. But I know that space helped me feel closer to what it meant to make a difference. And so I kind of just reached back out to them and said, hey, do y'all have anything else that I can do during my time here or just in this space? And they created a position for me to come in and do academic enrichment work ongoing with their young people. And that space was very instrumental for me because I was able to sit in staff meetings with people who were doing community organizing on the areas of education, housing, senior rights, youth rights, and really on the forefront of a lot of those issues, especially for Black folks, particularly in the city of Chicago, and in a way that was independent of the current power structure. So, you know, Coco is known for being the people who gonna stand up when it's not popular, and people have a lot to say about them, but what we can say about them is that they always stand on the side of the people and that there's never any questions about that. And so I got to learn, you know, why people had housing instability, why, particularly for young people, it was very instrumental for me because at the time when I came back to Chicago, um, it was all this talk about the violence happening in the city. And for me, being able to work with the young people and go inside of some of CPS schools and really see what was happening in the schools was very instrumental for me. I, looking back on it now, can say that I had an experience, a learning experience that was very different from what's happening inside of most CPS schools. So I came up in Catholic school, in grammar school, and then I went to a selective enrollment school for high school. And so this whole time I'm thinking that the type of education that I have is the type of education, for the most part, that's going on in all other spaces as well. And, you know, nothing too far away from that. And so I'm going inside of CPS high schools and I'm like, these kids' homework is drawing shapes, but this is from geometry class. And so the more I started to see what was happening with those young people and the type of education they were getting, it started to become less of a mystery to me on why there was so much violence in the city. Because, you know, with the options that young people are getting inside of CPS schools, there's not much for them to do if they continue to go and get the diploma. Once they get the diploma, there are not a lot of options for folks past that point. And so that's how I got into organizing or the organizing space. And then from there, my appetite just grew. This is the same time that, you know, unfortunately, the murder of Trayvon Martin is happening, and the names keep rolling from there, you know. And so that was politicizing me, and then also the on-the-ground experience that I was having in Coco was politicizing me as well. And I've done a number of different things in the organizing space. I have worked on a number of different issues, all of the issues that I named. So, housing, education, not public safety, police brutality, um, electoral politics, which is again something I never thought I would be in, but the fight for, better conditions, living conditions for Black people in Chicago has brought me into took me into electoral politics. Um, yeah, all of those areas. And I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit about how that transitioned into my work around co-ops.
Continue. Yes. Persist on. Yeah, we'll dig into it in a moment, but yeah.
Okay.
Persist.
And so being at COCO, which is a powerful organization, it's a 501c3 nonprofit, which most groups that do organizing work are structured as a 501c3, was also very instrumental to me because a lot of that work depends on some form of philanthropy, foundations, especially if you want to be independent, because you do have, some other groups who receive government funding and things like that, which can tie people's hands at some point around the work that they do. And even the philanthropic work as well, right? Because you can only go as far as your funders will give you the room to go. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I was always looking at how do we build up an economic foundation for this work that we want to do that really gives us the power in these spaces and gives us self-determination in these spaces, which is probably one of my biggest values that I carry with me, both personally and communally. And so I was kind of had that question in my mind, but didn't have like clear thoughts for what that meant. And in some ways I was looking at entrepreneurship. Like at the time, everybody was selling T-shirts. So I was okay, well maybe we could sell some T-shirts and use the profits to pay for movement work and things like that. And I had a friend named Samira who I met at a conference who had done some work in school around workshop. The people who make shirts.
The as in like
sweatshops.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Right,
yes, sweatshops. She had done some work as a student in that movement and kind of was familiar with the co-op model, and she told me about that, and I started researching it on my own. And then a couple really stars aligned where I had been doing this work and kind of like learning about co-ops on my own, and then I had gone to this like a talk that a friend of mine did in his house named Quinn, and the whole thing was about co-ops, and I had no idea that it was about co-ops. So then that space I learned about the book Collective Courage and started learning about the Black history of co-ops. And then I had some other comrades who are part of education justice movement who taught me about the work that was going on in Jackson, Mississippi. And this was around the same time that the son, Chokwe Lumumba, was running for mayor. And so it was both the idea of having economic power and political power. And so it's really this events, like series of events that, I had no control over, but kind of have led me in the direction to do the work that we do today. So,
yeah. Yes. So, we are here on the Ujamaa Hour with Joan Fadayiro of Cooperative, as well as Alderman Taylor's office. So if you have any comments or questions or reactions or thoughts, make sure that you go ahead and just drop those in the comment section. That way, when we wrap up our conversation, we can make sure we refer out to those. So we look forward to conversing. This is a sort of a dual engagement. So we expect to hear from you, and we anticipate that, if you have questions, you'll drop them there. Yes, and we're here again every second Monday of the month. So, Joan, before I dig deeper on the current work, what's the relationship in your mind, between the biomedical sciences and organizing, if there's any?
There are a lot of similarities, I would say, or things that have been applicable in the organizing field. So the first one is that organizing some people say it's an art, some people say it's a science. It's probably a little bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that organizers see the world different from how it currently is,
Mm-hmm.
and we think through strategies to get to the world that we want to live in and the world that we want to see, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the same thing as science. We look at a problem, we come up with a solution, we
Mm-hmm.
do some work to see if the solution works. If it doesn't, we come back to the drawing table, or drawing board, and see what worked, what didn't work, and we go
Mm-hmm.
back at it. And that's organizing. We try out some strategies and some tactics, see how far that got, or how close that got us to the goal, and if we need to go further, then we reassess, see what works, see what didn't work, and get back at it. There's this like cycle, and I may miss one part of it, but it's like theory goes into action, goes into reflection, goes back into theory, action, reflection. And so I think that's the scientific method, so to speak, of organizing. Um, the other part was, like I said, at the time I was doing work that was around health disparities, right? And having had my experience as an organizer now, I go back and realize how flawed that work is, because you look at all these different, what they call indicators of, why people are susceptible to getting certain conditions, and, the likelihood of survival, and all those other things. And not once in all that work was oppression one of the indicators, right? They talk about, your age, your race, your gender, all this other stuff, but even your income, right? Your social conditions, but they never list oppression as an actual indicator, which could probably tell you more about the likelihood of what conditions people will get and what their survival rate will be
Mm-hmm.
than all those other things put together. My humble opinion. And so one time I was like in the meeting at the state building. This was very early on when I became or came into the organizing space. And this woman kind of asked me what I was doing, or what did my background, my degree, da 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 da. And she said, I told her, I was studying health disparities. She said, oh yeah, that's very important, X, Y, and Z. I said, yeah, I think the wealth disparity. And this is before I even had an income consciousness around capitalism and all those other things. So I was just like, yeah, I think wealth disparity is actually the more pressing issue that we should deal with. Because obviously, when you tell people like, oh yeah, I used to study science, they're like, well, what the heck are you doing here? Like, this is related to a lot of the stuff that we was talking about when I was in undergrad, but nobody was talking about this part of it. We was
Mm-hmm.
focused on all these other things. So, it's an interesting story.
Yes, yes. It's an interesting story that I've heard across a number of different disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
I've recently been listening to a lot of economists who might consider themselves quasi-radical or
Mm-hmm.
radical, and certainly, many of them say, yeah, I went into economics and I was expecting to hear all these things about, there were these things I wanted to like, shape the world, right? But it's all math. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's all numbers and these formulas, and they're and so the interesting thing is that the economists that are on the fringe or on the edge of sort of discovery nowadays have connected economics to the other lived experiences and the other conditions that exist in the world, certainly
Mm-hmm.
economics and ecology,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those things. So that leads me to a question for you. How do you frame the word economy? When you think about economy or economics, how do you grapple with its meaning?
Mm-hmm. I don't have the most elaborate answer. For me, an economy is anything that involves an exchange of anything. So whether that's goods, services, energy, any type of exchange that people are making between themselves, or communities are making between each other, I would put in the category of an economy.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your work seeking to impact Black community economies,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, how does your current work, or your broad sort of pantheon of work, do that? How are you moving on these sort of economic dimensions and economic indicators at the present?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think our study and working group does a lot, or at least that's the space where I see my impact on economy, particularly in Black communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole reason that the study group was started because that is the large part of the Black tradition of um, Black cooperative economics.
Hmm.
And I think, growing, I'm gonna go into a long short story,
Go
but
ahead.
growing up in Catholic school, we always celebrated Kwanzaa. So I
Hmm.
was always familiar with the idea of cooperative economics. But you know how people will go into great details about the other principles of Kwanzaa, and then we get to cooperative economics, it's kind of like, okay, and moving
Not black.
on. We didn't even get that. We just got cooperative economics, moving on. And so for me, it's also been like this great thing to really understand, okay, well, how do we do that? What does that mean? What does that look like in practice? And so um, one of the reasons that I believe in cooperative economics, for instance, when I say that in order to have strong movements, we have to have some type of economic base or some type of economic generator. Um, the one alternative that people go to is by black or black capitalism, as people like to say. And one, regular capitalism is not working for white people. So why we would think that black capitalism is going to work for the masses of black people is beyond my theory. But to each their own. But when we think about how do we impact communities, like an actual community of black people, and uplift or just being able to have the found. What I like about cooperatives is that the goal is to have economic independence and hopefully to gain independence in other spaces as well. But as long as we have to worry about where our money comes from and where our livelihood comes from, it makes it a lot less likely for people to resist and say no to the system that we currently live under. So that was the whole reason that I got into cooperative economics. And again, study groups are a large part of the Black tradition of co-ops. And from there, people built co-ops from that study group. And so the reason why we do study groups for the most part is just to identify Black folks in particular, but anybody that wants to get down on a project um, that want to build co-ops, because coming from organizing, you can have a great idea, but you and your great idea is not going to be enough to get it off the ground, right? Or um, it's a lot easier to go into a community and door knock with 7 people than it is your one person. So, if we really want to look at this as a strategy on how do we actually build the cooperatives, we have to be thinking about how do we bring people in the space that agree with the same idea, and then can go out to other people and say, okay, now this is an uh, um, this is something that may be useful to our community. What do you think about it? Does this work for you? Is this
Hmm.
something that sounds good for you? Um, and I try to explain that to people all the time because people are like, well, what is a study group going to do? It's like, well, I couldn't go out by myself and build no cooperatives, but I could find some people who want to build cooperatives, and we'd probably be a lot more successful. And we talk about this all the time too, and we do make some decisions as a part of our group, but we don't see ourselves as decision makers. We see ourselves as people who come together to eventually engage community around this idea. So I would say that is a lot of the impact right now as it stands on how I look at my impact in the Black community. And then, it is to be told around what we are able to do in this political space.
Hmm.
Um, Jeanette brought me into the office because she knew I was doing cooperative economics, and she liked the model, especially being able to use it in our ward, which is predominantly, it's all people of color and predominantly Black, and we have like 15% of our ward that's Latinx people as well. And so it's a strategy that works for all people, particularly all people of color. So we want to see cooperative co-ops, both worker co-ops, housing co-ops, land trusts. We want to see all of those things happen in our ward. Um, but similar to our study group, we have to build up the appetite of our people around that as well. Like, we can't go in day one and be like, okay, yeah, we want 10 cooperatives in this community, because then we're going to be scrambling to find the people who are going to build the cooperatives. And so that's the work that we're going to be doing very early on, is to work with people to understand what is it and how could they possibly be a part of it. So I see that work happening in both of those spaces. And there's like some informal stuff too that I'm sure I work with others to do, but that doesn't quite come to my mind now. But just, like simple ride sharing, like making sure we all got a ride together to a place and back, or food, things related to food and things like that too. So it's a few ways that in collaboration with other people, I help make some sort of impact
So
on the economy.
I certainly see, like, yes, I mean, we might frame those things under the level of mutual aid. And certainly
Mm-hmm.
in the solidarity economy framework, mutualism is definitely one of the core, principles and tenets there.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's very valid. And mutual aid also shows up within Co-op for Lib quite a bit, in terms of
Uh-huh.
the mutual aid check-in portions that we do, and just the support we've had to lend very frequently, with some of our participants and members. So, what's the sort of importance of that to you in terms of the organizing you've done, the organizing you're doing? How does mutual aid factor as a matter of importance to you?
Yeah, I think it's everything, to be quite honest, because I think sometimes what we miss in movement spaces, um, especially, I don't know how this is everywhere, but I would say especially in Chicago. Well, I only know the Chicago context, so let me say that. But I think so much about organizing has been shaped by the Alinsky model, right? And the idea of like self interest, and you don't build personal relationships in organizing, you build professional ones and all this other stuff. And I don't know how that works in other communities, but that don't work for us. And it don't work. Okay. People have to sacrifice a lot to be a part of these movements, and they have to put in a lot of work to do this work on top of just being black in America, on top of just being black in Chicago, which is probably more than enough of a responsibility to do. So if we really talking about again, growing this movement, then we have to have relationships that address the needs of the people who come into the space. And I think that that's what we do around mutual aid. And again, it's mutual, so it goes both ways. So there are some things that I put into the pot, and then it's some things that I get back from. Listen, y'all done saved me on a few occasions. Okay, me and my little car. Okay, y'all have helped me with my challenges with the car, or like my computer went out one time, and I was just like, look, it was a space to kind of share what you could offer, what you needed in the space. And then somebody's Ted was like, oh yeah, I know how to do some work on the computer, and it was fixed. And that was probably close to $300 or $400 that I didn't have to necessarily go out and give to a company, right?
Right.
So it's been everything. And personally making sure that I'm showing up for people. If folks need rides, if they need help with anything, like just making sure that I'm there, because we can't build relationships with people if the only time we talking to them is about coming to a meeting or something else. So yeah.
All right, all right. Yes, and okay, just checking that where we are in the hour. So we're around down to about 25 minutes in the broadcast. That's actually there's an extra 15 minutes on this. Maybe it's 10 minutes left in the broadcast. We'll see. But we're here at the Ujamaa Hour speaking with Joan Fadayiro about the illustrious work of organizing in the city of Chicago, the illustrious and challenging work of organizing in Chicago. And to your point about the sort of Alinsky school, I was listening to the New Dawn podcast. I'm forgetting the host there, Michael something. But they had an episode where they were contrasting the Alinskyist model of organizing with what they called the Johnny Tillman model.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Tillman being former executive director of National Welfare Rights Organization, and just recognizing that if you want to know how to organize around welfare rights, you don't send a professional in there and say like, what do you need? Look, here's how we gonna do it. Who is here we gonna pressure? No, you say like, how do you want this movement to go? And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, it's not how you want it to go. It's like, okay, I'm here at your service, right?
Right.
So yeah, the contrasting models, which is that, yes, I mean, and it's very common language nowadays with people, most impacted by the issue, should be
Mhm.
the people at the forefront of the leadership.
Mhm.
Um, so um, how did you so there's you mentioned the meeting at Quinn's place, and then I know the inception of the forums is sort of
Mhm.
one point. What's the distance between when you hear this co-op model at Quinn's house, and then you have the forums? What's the sort of distance and the sort of time between there?
So it was pretty quick. So I don't remember exactly when I heard about the co-op model, but I do remember I was sitting like in a coffee shop with a friend, Samira, and just talking. And I would say it might have been 6 months in between that and being at the meeting at Queen's house where I heard about like there was an actual book that talked about Black people doing cooperatives because we talk about this all the time. If you just go and like type in co-ops or cooperatives, you don't see a whole bunch of Black people. And so there's this idea that like Black people haven't contributed to the cooperative movement, or that even more outlandish, which is perpetuated a lot of times, but the idea that the cooperative movement is something that is bestowed upon us. And so it was very helpful to get that book. And I would say, no, actually, it was a lot of time. This is what happened. So I would say maybe, oh man, now you're making me think.
That's what we do on the Ujamaa.
um,
We make people think. So.
okay, yeah. So, oh yeah, so that meeting happened in December at the when I learned about the book. And then I want to say by February, because this was around the same time that Trump had been elected. And so I think I did my first forum like in January or February of 2000, would have been 2017. And it was titled like Black People in Trump, What Now? Or something like that. And I think the reason why it was really important to have that space is because for whatever reason, when Trump was elected, the resistance was about everything except for Black people, as if he hadn't also shared this whole agenda about what he thought about Black people. Even like his whole pro police and pro militarization, he didn't say it, for instance, but his whole like he kept saying law and order. And those who know the history of Black people in this country know that law and order means a very particular thing, especially for Black folks. Um, and so it was just this coded language that he was using around Black people where he was more explicit about how he felt about other groups of people. And so it was very important to have that conversation. And that conversation was really for, but it was also to say that what Trump means for Black people in this current moment is no different from what at least Black people have experienced in this city under the mayor that we had at the time, but really across the country, like a whole. It wasn't going to be that much different for us, and that was the whole point of it. And so once we kind of understand that, then how do we think about what do we need to be doing in this current moment to really advance our work or advance our conditions as Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of went about this roundabout way of like, unveiling the whole idea of building co-ops in Black communities. But really, again, the forums were a way to like connect with folks who might be interested in a model like this. So yeah, I would say I would say maybe a year total in between when I first heard about co-ops and when the actual forums and convenings started happening.
Okay, okay. And and eventually I make it to one of these forums. You reach out, and you say, hey, you interested in this idea?
It actually was the reverse. So we had the forums, and we did the event, um, um, Cooperation for Liberation, which comes from Jessica Gordon Nimhart, who wrote the book Collective Courage. I was watching a video of hers, and she had said she used the term like cooperation for the purposes of liberation, not just cooperatives for cooperative's sake, as people like to say. Um, And so I kind of took that and used it as like the framework for that forum, which then became the name of our study group. But I think we had did that, and then you and I had talked, or maybe it was before, but at some point you and I were talking, and you were doing the time bank thing at that time. And I just had this idea that I wanted to do cooperatives, but hadn't really like went fully in on it. And you were kind of like, yeah, so you're trying to do a study group? Like, you were basically asking me, like, so what you want to do with all of this?
Bottom
um,
line is
right. And you were doing groups around the Adrienne Marie Brown book,
the emergent strategy
Emergent
sessions at that time.
Strategy.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. So you had already been doing it. I think you kind of, I think we both, the reason why we both kind of got into it, because we was like, ooh, another person that want to do this. Yes. Like, let's, let's
Don't
get
tell
in on this
nobody. You
together.
say.
At least that was what I was thinking. Like, okay, we could team up on this thing. And yeah, that's how we started the study group. And it's been an interesting journey because I think we see the utility of our space. We see it in similar ways, but we also see it in different ways, which I think is good because it can, what I've had to learn throughout the process is that it can be a space for both. And so how do we balance that, right? And so you want to make sure that when Black folks want to come and learn how to build a co-op, there's somebody to be there to teach them. And very important. And my thing is, and we gotta, part of how we teach them is by knowing how it works. And so us getting our hands, dirty and getting into it and figuring out, okay, if we say we want to use this as a strategy, let's actually build a co-op to see, does it work? And even and if it does work, what are the lessons that we learn to be able to share with more people? And so, yeah. What was your question?
No, I started down that pathway of like, yeah, so you're doing the forums and you contact me
Oh
and
yeah, yeah.
you amended the story, so that was a fantastic moment. So you're on this broadcast with this tiny viewership, so hello to our humble 3 listeners or whatever it is. So what's your challenge to the cooperative space? If
Mm-hmm.
you're speaking out into the ether, we've had some of these conversations inside of the group, but what's your challenge to the cooperative space if you had to kind of call one thing out? I know you've got several.
The cooperative space as it currently is.
Cooperative space, cooperative movement as it currently
Okay.
exists. Yes.
Well, you didn't have to ask me that question because you know what my challenge is. But so I've had the opportunity to be in a number of spaces. The very first cooperative, the introduction to the cooperative movement that I went to was this conference who I'm not going to say the name of, okay? But if you ever talk to me, I don't mind having that conversation. But yeah, I go into the room and it was very corporate and very like suits and ties. And I was like, and also, to be quite honest, it was very white male. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a little different than what I was expecting. It was talking about the impact of cooperatives. And it also had this, what interested me in it is that it had the idea that it was going to talk about the global impact of cooperatives, right? And so I'm just knowing, like, it's going to be some people there. They're going to have some radical politics. And that was not what I found at all. Yeah, it was like, there was one talking about the impact that had, like, I don't know. It was just weird. It was like a panel full of white people talking about the impact of cooperatives, but particularly in like Black communities or communities of color. So, okay. And then the one that talked about the global impact, again, in countries of color, was again just white people talking. And I was like, okay, well, this is a little different than what I was anticipating. Um, and even engaging with like the national cooperative movement is been very much like white identified folks coming in and teaching Black and brown people how to cooperate, which respectfully I think is the most ludicrous thing that I've ever heard of. Like, um one, our cultures come from people who this was just life. Like they didn't call it cooperatives, they called it living, and the idea, and that is history that has been stripped away from us. There's so much history in this country that has been stripped away from us. And even like coming to this country, these Jessica Gordon Nemhart teaches us like we've been doing this since day one. Slave revolts were an example of cooperation. The Underground Railroad was an example of cooperation. Which it was some good white people that helped cooperate with us. But again, this was also work that we were doing, and even after um, emancipation. This was again work that people have been doing during the civil rights movement. Cooperatives were the basis of it was the economic foundation and engine that we need now during the civil rights movement. And so the idea that this is something that we don't know about and that people are bringing us the good news about cooperatives and how they work and how they function and how we can use this as a model for our people is just very strange to me.
Yes.
And I would say that's probably my biggest critique. My second critique is the idea of how we fund these cooperatives, and how I feel about that. But currently, a lot of the resources out there, and if people know different ones, please reach out to us. But a lot of it is loan based, and so we are talking about economic independence and economic freedom for people, but it's attached to money that we have to pay back. And that, to me, doesn't get us very far. If we're talking about, we should really be talking about a reparations way of funding co-ops, particularly in Black communities, because that's what gets us ahead. Um, or even as we think about, I'm always pushing this, we think about how do we fund this? What can we do early on to start to generate some type of income that could be fed into cooperative development? And then again, you have the philanthropic arm that has done some work, but to be honest, most of it is loan money. Most of the money that people are pointed towards for cooperative development is loan money. And then you also have the philanthropic money as well. But I would say sometimes again, how that money comes is that it goes through an organization that is probably white led or predominantly white, and they come into communities of color and help people build co-ops. And at the end of the day, I don't understand that a lot of that money is actually coming to the people who are building the co-ops. So I think that we just have to be um, very thoughtful about what funding looks like for this model in our communities.
Yes, yes. And to your first critique, there is, on the way over, I was listening to a podcast, Everything Co-op Vernon Oaks. And I'm forgetting his guest's name at the moment, but what I did remember, as I was walking over to the Office Depot to pick up some printing, is they were talking about CARE. Now, and I'm forgetting CARE's acronym, or its original acronym anyway, but effectively CARE was a sort of cooperative partnership set up to rebuild, or to send food to Europe, in the aftermath of World War II. And they were talking about sort of the iterations that CARE went through, and they were like, yeah, CARE is not a cooperative anymore; it's now an NGO in developing countries. So, I mean, in terms of what cooperatives have looked like from that particular point, and so essentially, CARE is actually a part of CARE went off and became said organization that organized conference, and then a part of CARE becomes this NGO. But CARE wasn't there like to like help. I mean, essentially, yeah, maybe some farmers got aid, but effectively, CARE was there to open up new markets.
Yeah, I mean, it's like globalization in
Yes.
a lot of ways. This whole, I don't understand. I was gonna say I try to. I don't try to understand it. Like sometimes when you don't understand something, it's because it doesn't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
and people are not going should try not to like persuade you otherwise, right? And I just think that we have to be careful because it's like people are making a whole nother economy off of cooperative development, and it's like, no, just give us the resources. Just give us the resources, honestly, the best thing that you can do for the global economy is to give them the resources too. I
Mhm.
mean, the biggest issue that a lot of these places have is trying to navigate the economic issues that have been instilled in their communities from all of the different systems that we've been existing through. Like, it would be great if black people hadn't had the history that we had in this country. We'd probably be doing a lot of great things and would not need your help. And the same in these other countries. But because of that history, we are in the situation that we are in now. And so how do we start to repair that so that people can actually like live their lives and not have to worry about the stuff that we have to worry about on an everyday basis? So
Yes, yes. And that is a call to action from Joan Fadayiro. Just give us the resources. Just give us the resources. I mean, that's it, and that's all. And if you would like to know more about what we are talking about here, and where am I at? Boom, right here. Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. We just had a meeting, and our next meeting is February. I'm okay. I was counting you to help me out, but you ain't gonna help me.
oh, it's the
Third.
23rd, yes.
Boom. There we go. See, that's why we a tag team, right? February 23rd is the next meeting of Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group. Just to note, yesterday was a snow day for a lot of folks, so it was a challenge for folks getting out. So we're going to carry forward an agenda. But we are in our co-facilitation space, and our next co-facilitator is going to be Camille Kerr of Upside Down Consulting, who's going to be talking to us about cooperative governance. And, for anyone who was there doing the sort of E.G. Wood visit, and for anyone who was not there during the E.G. Wood visit, you can hear and understand sort of what's happening in the governance of the E.G. Wood Development Cooperative. So it should be certainly an interesting conversation, and it comes right in the midst of when we're also talking about steering committees inside of the study group. So yes, it collides. All things come together. For the good of cooperation. So that's where you can find us, 1434 West 51st Street. You can we'll be there from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. We generally have some grub there, so folks can get their nosh on. We are about that mutual aid of making sure that you have a meal while you're sitting down here having these deep discussions and dialogues about Black communal economies. So check us out. Are there other last words that you want to leave folks with, as we conclude this broadcast? You got that strong, just give us the resources to the cooperative movement, deck them in the eye. So what else do you want to leave us
Yeah.
with?
I guess I want to say with that, I have a completely different thing to say, but with that, understanding that, yeah, if you want to come collaborate with us in a way that like is with us or with our leadership, then yeah, come on. Like, yeah, y'all got the information. Like, come on, but let's do it in a way that honors the voices of the people who are Black and brown folks. To be honest, like, not as like a you're imparting some type of wisdom on us, but how can this work for you, and what do you need from us? To be honest, because I don't think that it happens that way. So that's that piece. And I don't think this is something that particularly the people who listen to this would necessarily mean, but just us continuing to be critical, right? Because I think the people who would watch something like this are already very critical people. They have a lot of critiques of a lot of things. But when we go back into our communities, people are not necessarily having conversations about solidarity economies. And so, to be quite honest, more people are talking about buying Black. And because we live in a capitalist system and we don't have the co-ops yet, yeah, go buy Black, go buy your Black stuff, support the Black economy. However, if you're really talking about Black people having an economic base, then we have to be pushing the conversations further and like listening to people. Because in the office, in the political office that I work in, we have people come in and talk about all kinds of things. And so we have this very strong voiced visitor who's all about the buy Black and all this other thing. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but how is that a strategy for all Black people? And so just making sure that we're continuing to challenge the spaces that we're in, push people, share new ideas, right? Because my experience has been every time I share about a cooperative, people are like, yeah, I like that. How do we do it, right? Nobody's like, no, that's not going to work. Especially people who are finding challenges in the current economy, which
Mm-hmm.
is most people. So just making sure that we're taking this work into all of the spaces that we're in and at least getting people thoughts about it. You know, it's not, you may not be at the point where you want to start organizing people around it, but just drop it and see what people think about it, and then from there use it as a way to continue to build out, and eventually like start doing the work.
Yes, yes. And and a sort of sidebar in terms of the story around that. I was recently at my neighborhood association meeting, so we meet on the second Saturday of every month. Jeffrey Man, well, no, South Deary Manor Community Association. We had to change the big name to get the big neighborhood. Longer story.
Mm-hmm.
But so I was at the meeting of the neighborhood association, and I've pitched the president of the neighborhood association about I pitched her about the other part of the work, the time bank. But she'd also somehow we'd also got on the conversation of cooperatives, and so anytime I muddle collaboratives and cooperatives, people can't they end up
Mm-hmm.
mixing the two permanently. So like anytime she's talking, and she's like, yeah, he's do that collaborative thing. So he do collaborative businesses. Like, well, no, that's a cooperative business.
But also it is though, like they talking, it's a collaborative business. That's
Yes.
she may not call it, or they may not call it a cooperative, but they know what the motto is and they
Absolutely.
like it.
Yes. And the funny and the other part of that discussion was that this past meeting, so of course, I mean, I've mentioned on this broadcast before that the Walgreens closed down in Jeffrey Manor. But down the street, the Fresh Market opened up a grocery store on 95th and Jeffrey, 96th and Jeffrey. And as it turns out, that the owner of that establishment came to the neighborhood association meeting, ostensibly trying to partner with the neighborhood association in some way. Um, Mike Monsley, I think that's his name. But apparently, he also owns a fresh market in Gary.
Mm-hmm.
Weird connections.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he came into the room, I mean, the last time that they asked me to pitch about the collaborative, essentially she texted me like, an hour before the meeting. She was like, can you come in and be prepared to talk for like 5 minutes about your work? And I'm like, my work don't fit in 5 minutes and I can't prep an hour to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I gave them something, which probably was not sufficient. But when he came into that room and then he was, trying to kind of meet and, connect, he goes up to talk to her. I mean, I'm prepping to kind of, head out. She's like, Mike, don't leave. I need to talk to you. And effectively, she ushers me over there, and she's like, yes. So, this is Mike, and he has some insights on collaborative businesses, and I want you and him to be in conversation. So if you're gonna be in our community, you need to talk to him. I have no idea what I'm going to talk to this fresh market guy about, but I did let him
Listen.
know, like, hey, I mean, I used to operate the Healthy Food Hub in South Shore. So, I can tell you about produce and I can tell you about, vendors and distribution. And, if you are sourcing, poorly, I can tell you where to get better.
And
Um,
also worker ownership, right? And
absolutely.
again, you just drop it.
Just
See
drop it.
how they feel about it. You drop it some more,
Yes.
start, something like that could be starting to organize some of the other residents to start dropping it too, and then
Yes.
seeing what could happen with it. So, yeah, it's a lot of opportunity. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're talking about starting a Chamber of Commerce there. And I'm definitely going to introduce the Business Alliance principles from Boston and the Boston Ujamaa Project. Like, hey, if you want to be an accountable business in our community, here's some things you could start doing.
Hmm.
One, you could stop making me put my bag down when I go in the grocery store. You
Oh my God.
know.
That's going to be the next session. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So this has been a delightful conversation. We are at the end of our time here on the Ujamaa Hour with myself, Mike Strode of the Coconut Collaborative, and Joan Fadayiro of Cooperation for Liberation, and representing Woodlawn and South Chicago. Which neighborhood are you in,
So I
technically?
live in Calumet.
Calumet
Calumet
Heights.
Heights.
Calumet Heights. Look at
I
her.
like to
She on the
say
hill.
we
She in
call
the
it over east where I'm from,
she in
but
the non-flood zones. She in the uppity part. You know what I'm saying? Just
no,
own your Calumet Heights stuff.
stop it. I was about to say something. Oh, but the work I do is Woodlawn, Washington Park, back of the yards, New City, Inglewood, and a little bit of Greater Grand Crossing, which because of the housing conditions in Chicago right now, are communities that cannot afford to move into, especially like Woodlawn and Washington Park. So yeah, but I'm looking at how to move into the ward as well.
Okay, okay, yes. So, I'm sure that expanding into that work is another conversation. So make sure you are at the next community benefits agreement meeting, wherever
Mhm.
that's happening, just make sure you check with Alderman Taylor's office about that. And until then, we'll see you at the next session of Movement Monday. Again, second Monday of every month. So we'll be back here again in March. And I have no idea who our guest will be because I actually haven't done my guest lineup for 2020. And Joan was a surprise guest. So we'll see who'll be here in March. I'm thinking maybe Chicago again or maybe not. Who knows? But be back here for the second Monday of every month. Be at Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group on February 23rd. Be at the Food Policy Summit on February 21st. Be here at Floods Hall on February 28th for the next Time Salon Mixer, and be in Oak Park at Compound Yellow for the another session of the Needs and Offers Market. Because we are all over the city, with this activity, because this is about creating economies or helping people to recognize where these economies already exist inside of their neighborhoods, inside of their community, amongst one another. This has been the Ujamaa Hour, and we thank you. Peace all. You get to see me fiddling around with this mouse while I try to end this session. So look at that. In the